Alrighty. Well, two of the things that Sandra and I hope to speak with you about today are going to be focused on um, congressionally directed spending, which we may also use the acronym CDS for, as well as Congressional Research Services, which we may also refer to as CRS.
And folks should know we're going to be sharing this out at the end. So no worries if you don't have paper and pen with you.
Yes. All right. So today in our presentation, we are hoping that this will help build relationships and that you will feel more connected with your Senate office after this hour. And then we also will attempt to just clarify what these two processes are so that you will come away with a better understanding of how to receive federal funds from your senator and the federal government. We intend to go over the different things that our office offers, as well as broadly all senatorial offices. We will review the appropriations timeline and process, as well as go over best practices for appropriations applications. And then finally, we will review the types of services that Congressional Research Services offer. Our office offers a variety of services to California residents. Many of the services are listed on this screen, but I want to spotlight a few. We have the opportunity to offer meetings both with Senator Butler or her staff. If you apply for federal grants, you are welcome to connect with our office to request letters of support, as many of these grants are competitive. And we have found that a letter from your senator is helpful as the federal agencies assess your application. And we also offer certificates of commendation. That may be something you are interested in if your business is celebrating an important anniversary, or you would like a large achievement that you've accomplished celebrated. Please let us know. We want to be able to champion you and make you feel appreciated and recognized.
One thing I will mention real quickly is, let's say that you apply or a nonprofit that you're associated with applies for, like, a good example just happened, EPA grant. That is what Camille is talking about. You can reach out to your Senate office, and a letter goes a really long way. The other thing I wanted to mention too is some of you may sit on boards, nonprofit boards, or just boards in general, and you're looking for a way to motivate and inspire your members. You can also reach out to your offices and receive certificates, right? So just kind of, I want to give examples so folks can kind of start to think about, hey, we can use this resource.
Thank you, Sandra. So to start to get into the meat of the presentation today, let's chat about appropriations, or what congressionally directed spending is. So we have a few different terms that we use for this. You may be familiar with it in regards to the federal appropriations process. You maybe have heard of congressionally directed spending, or if you have had conversations with one of your House members, perhaps they refer to it as community project funding or earmarks. Regardless of what name it is called, all of these things just encompass the annual government funding process, where members of Congress, that is both your senators and your member of the House of Representatives, are able to request that federal spending be directed to specific projects within their district, or in Senator Butler's case, the entire state of California. Nonprofits, state, local governments, tribal governments are all invited to apply, as well are businesses that are collaborating with any of these three entities. Typically, community congressionally directed spending, excuse me, is not meant to go to for profit organizations unless there is a wide public impact. But you can still apply for this if you are working in partnership with a nonprofit on a project or within your state or local government to help improve the community. And some
And
general
just,
projects. Oh, yes,
oh,
Sandra.
I'm sorry, I just want to jump in real quick. So this kind of highlights where this idea actually came from. It came from the award ceremony that took place not too long ago, and where you all really want to combine public and private coming together. So this is a really great opportunity when you start to think about how do you do that, right? How do you merge public, private, and really work together to move the community forward? This is where this funding can happen.
100%. Thank you for bringing that up. And then lastly, some general project guidelines are that typically projects funded by congressionally directed spending or appropriations receive funding of about $1 to $2 million. Another thing that is looked for when these projects are being assessed is that they have a pretty clear start and finish line. We want to make sure that these are tangible projects that are likely to be accomplished, and that the funding they receive will actually be used. So, in applications, we ask for a pretty thorough outline of how this project would be accomplished. And then lastly, I just want to flag that there will be additional eligibility requirements, which are dependent on the type of project. And that is set by the 12 appropriation committees that fund these projects. So, most organizations do not apply to all 12 committees, but instead, we hope in having the 12 committees that there is a set of agencies that are relevant to the type of work that you would like funded. And each of them have their own specific prerequisite. So, for example, if you were looking for funding for something that's health and human services related, you would be reviewing the prerequisites that the Labor, Health, and Human Services, as well as Education and related agencies appropriation committee has set. You don't have to worry too much about what energy and water development is asking for of their application, for example.
And you won't have to worry. I'm sorry, Camille. I'm just going to jump in
Yes,
just so I
please.
can highlight something. Sorry about that. And you won't have to worry about guessing where your application would fall under,
No.
because when you apply, there's like extensive reading that folks have to do. And then you will then read through all of the 12 and see where your application would actually, apply to and associate with. So
Mhm.
don't worry if these are the first time you're ever hearing about, one, the process, and two, the committees, right? There's a lot of committees. So don't worry
There,
about that.
there is. And additionally, thank you, Sandra. I wanted to flag that as you start to consider a type of project you may want to apply for the congressionally directed spending for. And if you really are
Wait,
unsure of the type of appropriations committee that your
stop,
project,
stop,
yes.
sit down.
Oh. I don't think that was directed to me. Um, you are welcome to reach out to our office, your House member's office, or Senator Padilla's office. Most likely, you should also include the incoming senator, whoever he may be. And the staff would be more than happy to discuss with you about where your application would most likely fall. And I know we've been chatting about some very abstract aspects of the congressionally directed spending applications. So I wanted to give some examples of types of projects that our office has received, as well as have received funding. Um, we tried to give kind of a sample that would fall under a few different committees' applications, but to an extent, the sky is the limit. Don't feel limited by the examples that we've provided today. I was just hoping that it would ground a, what we've been talking about a little bit more. I also wanted to talk about what this application process looks like. And I'm thrilled that we are able to chat with you today because the application process typically moves very quickly. And what we've found in the past is that it unfortunately kind of catches people by surprise because it happens early within the new year. And the application process is typically only a few weeks long. So, to start us off, applications are most likely going to be due in early spring 2025. And all congressional offices will be circulating their applications. Typically, that will be posted on each of their websites. But the deadlines that applications are due vary office to office. So, what we tend to recommend is that if you are interested in applying, you try to check your local office's website starting about mid-late February, as deadlines tend to appear around then to about early March. And as I mentioned, the application window is typically only about 2 weeks long. Moving on to the types of projects that are selected, it is often very, very competitive. The staff of each office that you've applied to does their best to try to meet with as many applicants as possible, just so that we can also hear a little bit more about the project, connect with you face to face. Sometimes tours are scheduled, which can help us get a better idea of what you are wanting funded. And then after that, requests will be submitted to the Appropriations Committee. And if approved by the Senate, House, and President, after each of the 12 Appropriations Committee has reviewed their specific applications, they will go and put together a final funding package, which then gets kind of approved or denied by the Senate, House, and President. Typically, congressionally directed spending is a very bipartisan thing. All members of Congress like to be able to bring back federal funds to their community. So once a final funding package has been created, it usually gets approved by the Senate, House, and President pretty quickly.
Camille, let's stay here for a hot second, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think I saw a question in the chat where it's like, hey, these are all construction equipment related. So let's talk a little bit more about when Camille said everything under the sun, I mean, really everything under the sun.
Yes.
Folks are applying, and let's just throw some out, Camille. Folks are applying for solar. Folks are applying, let's say that they need a building.
Yeah.
They're applying for programming expansion for workforce. They are applying for green spaces. Literally everything folks are applying for. Does somebody want to come off mute and say, hey, would this be equitable? I mean, does somebody want to give an example? I want to make sure that we land everything under these 12 committees to be applied.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. And I appreciate you flagging that. Sorry, all. The way that my screen is presenting, I'm unable to see the chat. So feel free, Sandra, to flag or come off, mute yourself. Another example I would say is I was working with a community up here in Northern California that was looking for funding to improve their child, like a nursery center. And so one thing I'll flag, most of the time, this funding is unable to go towards like salaries or sometimes to be hiring on new staff, which is why some of these projects are a little bit more construction or improvement based. But I would love to hear if you guys have any, questions or ideas off the top of your head and we can
Looks
chat
like we
about
have
that too.
one hand raised from Sharon Evans.
Perfect.
So we have working in one of the southern communities. We are looking to acquire an abandoned hospital facility and convert that into a combination of interim housing for homeless, but also a specialized center for dialysis patients, to address some of the public health disparities in the African American community.
Wow. That sounds like a phenomenal project. And I think that would, how, just as you've described it, I think that would definitely qualify to be an example of a type of application that would be considered through congressionally directed spending.
Hi there.
And Sonia, okay, go ahead, Sonia.
Thank you, Alicia. I'll just hop in because I did post the question in the chat, and I'm so glad that you mentioned the workforce program because that's kind of more along the lines of what I was thinking. And appreciate also, Camille, you're mentioning that salaries might not be a part of it because I think in terms of programming, that is really the lion's share and could be prohibitive. One of the things that we're thinking about here at the Valley Economic Alliance is the need for a strong, robust workforce pipeline that spans more than one city, but is a regional approach, connecting job seekers and employers and the training programs that can kind of connect the dots between this, to fill the skills gap. So if it's within your presentation to share how we can get that kind of project funded, it doesn't have capital related to it. We've got the facilities already that we need here in the Valley, but we need the people that would be hired to do this very labor intensive work to make that happen. Also, there are some maintenance of existing facilities that could kind of factor in, if we construct a new facility, then where's the budget going to come from to be able to maintain that facility going into the future? So if maybe you could speak to how that might be funded as well. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Now, you guys are bringing up great questions and phenomenal examples. We will be chatting later on in this presentation regarding services that the Congressional Research Services, provides in conjunction with our office. And I'm hopeful Sandra will get more into that, but that explores other federal funding opportunities outside of just the congressionally directed spending. CDS or this appropriations process can sometimes be limiting to an extent of the types of projects that it can fund. The maintenance of the facility you just introduced is something that might qualify under the appropriations, but you are right in regards to funding to hire a more kind of to build your team, that may not. What I also will flag is that the appropriations process in the requirements of each committee. So the example you provided sounds like that might fall under the Labor and Health and Human Services Committee. Each committee slightly revises their requirements each year. So I don't know if this upcoming spring we would start to see, there's funding now available for people's salaries, but the requirements do change every year. And so what we may have not been able to pass last year, you may have a application that meets the new requirements now. So if you have the bandwidth, I always recommend that it's a good idea to try to apply for appropriations each spring, because you never know. it might end up you might kind of get lucky.
Hey, Camille, your question that's in the chat from Margaret Vinci from Caltech. She said, can businesses, healthcare, utilities, schools, manufacturing apply for the implementation of earthquake early warning into their facilities?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I just really wanted to land, think of everything under the sun.
Yes.
That way, we get used to this process. Now, keep in mind, it happens every year unless it doesn't. And that is determined by the individual in the White House. So we just wanted to make sure that this happens Q1, Q2 of next year. And we just wanted to give everybody a head start.
Totally. Thank you, Sandra, for driving that home. What we, as mentioned, because the application window is often really short, I'm glad we're thinking about different project and application ideas now, because we don't want you guys to be caught unaware. And then lastly, just to wrap up this kind of application timeline, I wanted to say that if a project of yours is awarded, you would be contacted by the federal agency that will be dispersing the money to you. And then typically you would be obligated to, you'd receive those funds, and then they really request that you try to use them all within a calendar year. So moving to the next, Sandra and I wanted to give you guys an example of what an application kind of portal and then your application might look like. Again, we'll be sharing these slides afterwards, so you'll be able to zoom in really close. I want to flag that every senator and House member's application might look slightly different, but by and large, we felt that our an example of our application from this past year would hopefully just point you guys in the right direction and help you familiarize yourself with kind of the language and types of questions that may be asked of you. So this is kind of what our entry header page looked like. Then you'd create a specific application login for each office that you apply for.
And I would just say, if we could just back up, I'm sorry,
Yes,
Camille.
please.
I would say if you've never applied for appropriations, you're going to have to create an account.
Yes.
So that's something you definitely want to be aware of. And you want to do your due diligence and make sure you have somewhere safe your login information for each office. Because you might go on vacation and the process is still moving, and you want to make sure that your application is considered. So if you're in Hawaii, you want to be able to say, hey, Joseph, the logins are over here, jump on. So these little things really matter. And we'll talk about best practices shortly.
Yes. And then just to, I guess, provide a visual example of some of the questions that the application would ask. I know it's a lot to read, and I don't want to make you guys do it, but it kind of goes through all of these different identification things of where are you located in California? Can you provide a brief description of the project? Can you explain why you would like to receive federal funding, etc.? And then it also asks whether or not you've been a prior recipient of federal funding through this process or not. And I would kind of recommend that you look through this maybe after today's meeting. And if you have questions, Sandra and I intend to share our contact information at the end of this. So you can also email us directly if you're kind of confused by some of this language. And now we wanted to kind of go through some frequently asked questions that our office has received throughout this process.
Absolutely. And don't forget, you're going to get these, so you don't have to write them down. But Camille, how much funding should I request? Like, is there a real cap?
That's a good question, Sandra. Well, there isn't actually a set congressionally directed spending funding range for most accounts, meaning most of these committees. But
So question, doctor does want you to have x-rays done?
Yeah.
So are you able to do?
but I would say that the average project funding is about $1.5 million. However, we did receive projects that were requesting funding in the low $50,000, and we received some that were also requesting upwards of about $40 million. So I would just say that to, be honest about the funds that you think you need to complete this project. Know that if you are one of those requesting 40 million, we hope to see a very thorough spreadsheet of why you would like that much. But it will depend on the project and the need, as well as exactly the scope of what's going to be happening.
Yeah, and one thing I definitely want to mention here is when you go through the application process, they will ask for a line item budget. So you definitely want to start to prepare that. All right, great. And then that's just a best practice. And then let's see, we already kind of talked about what specific projects.
Yes.
So I think we can skip that one, but let's see. Can I submit this? Oh, I love this one. Can I submit the same project request to multiple members of Congress?
Definitely. We highly encourage this. Sometimes we had a few people tell us that they'd heard from another member of Congress that that wasn't the case. Or, if could they only apply to a senator's office and not their member of the House of Representatives. That's not true. In fact, we encourage that you seek support of your project from as many members of Congress as you can.
And a best practice is, let's say that you are located in the Valley, you could apply to your congressional member that covers that area and your senators, your 2 US senators, so that you have a wide spread, right, of applications out there. So another best practice.
Yes, I recommend getting your project in front of as many people as possible.
And then let's say if my project is selected, how do I hear and when do you think I would hear about it?
That's a good question, Sandra. So the Senate, at least, I can't speak for the House, although I believe that they have a similar process, but the Senate requires that each senator publicly disclose the projects that she or they have requested funding for. So typically, after our project recommendations have been submitted, which is about a month or so after we've received all of the projects. So to take us back to our deadline of late February, early March, where we receive all of your applications, we hope to be submitting requests for funding by, April, about a month later. And then we should start to be posting the project list of which projects have been selected for funding by the senator. And then we will post again a few weeks to a month later after that about which of those projects have made it to the next kind of step of consideration, and so on and so on, until we are able to celebrate and post the final list of projects that were actually awarded funding.
And just
Really
real
quick,
quick,
we do have a side question just to specify, when we're getting letters of support from our Senate offices, does it need to be our US senators, or would a state senator be helpful for federal funding as well?
I think that would be helpful as well. Typically, when we're receiving and reviewing applications, we will have letters of support written from your, town or city mayor, from board of supervisors, from state level legislators. Anything that just continues to emphasize why this project is important to your community, and can help it rise above as it's being considered among the many.
and just to be clear, we are speaking about 2020, we're talking about next year, right?
Yes.
So this process happens every year. The train already pulled off its tracks. Projects have already been selected for this year. We're talking and preparing folks for next year. So just wanted to make sure that was clear as well. Okay, great. Are there any other questions in the chat we should?
Nope, that's it. We can move ahead.
Awesome. Well, we have a few more frequently asked questions, but with each set, we would love if you guys have any questions, pepper them at us.
Yeah, and just to be clear, it's almost like there's multiple layers of approval, right? You submit, then the staff will review, then they submit to the senator, then that gets reviewed, it gets submitted to the subcommittee reviews, and then it really feels like an 80s movie when you're waiting to see if your name's on that list. Like for real, that's what it feels like for me. So just wanted to make sure you're aware that there's multiple layers of this that happens. Let's see. Can I apply for funding for a project that has already received CDS funding?
I would say that it depends both on the appropriations committee. Well, yeah, it largely depends on the appropriations committee. Some are a little bit more selective, where if you received funding the year prior, they say no, you have to wait a little longer. Others don't care and would, happily consider applications that have already received funding. I want to flag that this question is asking or is talking about projects and business groups that have received this funding. If you've applied but unfortunately were not selected in prior years, please don't let that prohibit you from applying again. And I guess the final thing I will say for those projects that have received this federal funding beforehand, we know and we've reviewed many applications that are broken out into different funding or construction steps. And so they've already gone through phase 2 and 3, and that's what they receive funding for. But now they're finally at phase 4, and they just need a little bit more federal funding to finally complete the project. That's okay. That would still be something that we would consider to try to help get funding for.
Great. Can we turn to the next page, Camille? Sorry.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Can I apply for funding for a project that was requested by a member in prior years that did not receive? You already answered that. We're going to move on. If multiple members of Congress do request my project, does the amount of funding I may receive increase?
Unfortunately, no. The funding doesn't stack, but I will say that if multiple members of Congress do request your project, it has a higher likelihood of being fully funded. That kind of goes back to what we were saying of I think it's a good idea to try to request support from as many members of Congress as you can in regards to your project, because the amount of funding your project receives will ultimately depend on the Senate and the House. And if you have members of both the Senate and the House wanting to support your project, it can happen where they will agree to fully fund it, or be able to provide most of the funding that you're requesting. Sometimes if you are only having support from one main member of either the Senate or the House, just because it's a total numbers game, hopefully you will still receive funding, but it may not be quite to the amount that you were hoping.
Great, thank you. Is there a deadline for when I would have to use all my funds if, my project got selected?
Certainly. That will depend on the appropriations committee, but typically organizations are highly recommended to use their funding within 1 calendar year.
And then we saw this, an organization applying with multiple projects. Can we do
Yes.
that? Of course we can,
Yes.
right?
You
Awesome.
certainly can.
Yeah. Sometimes you have organizations that are moving, nobody ever works on one thing at a time, right? So organizations are seeking funding for multiple projects, and that's okay.
Yes.
There was a question that popped up. Let me get to it real quick.
Thank you, Sandra.
How many applications on average are submitted? And how many funding awards are made? So let's see, we received over, and we were aggressive in regards to informing folks. We did, I think, 2 webinars across the state to inform folks, hey, there's this process to apply. I think we received over 1,000 applications. And then each subcommittee, I don't know, Camille, the exact numbers of how many folks got approved by each subcommittee.
Yeah, that's a good question. Annoying answer, I apologize, but it kind of depends year to year. Typically, each year we receive, as Sandra mentioned, a high amount of very competitive applications, but the amount of applications we receive per subcommittee is often skewed. So some years we get a ton from energy and water and not as many for health and human services. Other years that flips. And I would say that, us as a senator's office will most likely be reviewing the largest amount of applications within the state. Your House member may be receiving a slightly smaller amount. But that, again, I would still encourage you to apply to both congressmen. And then in regards to how many projects get funded, that also varies year to year because it depends on how much funding each project is asking. So typically, when we have a higher collection of projects that are requesting smaller funding amounts, it's easier to approve many more of them than if we are trying to fund a few key projects that are requesting that, like 40 million, for example.
There's a question in the chat. It's can not for, let me see, let me get it right.
Can a not-for-profit apply?
Yeah.
Yes. I would say yes. I also would say that in this case, like if you have a specific project and you're not sure whether or not it would receive funding, feel free to reach out to Sandra and I after this, or when with the next with our incoming senator, once they've set up office, like you're welcome to also schedule a meeting closer to the application process in January if you'd like to chat about it and you're unclear whether or not you could
And
qualify.
then we have another question.
Yeah.
We from the Valley Economic Alliance. If we reapply for a project that was not initially funded, is assistance available to improve our application?
I would say you definitely want to reach out to at least the staffer that holds that wheelhouse. So let's say that, I don't know, totally making this up, green space, you're trying to do some green space. The staffer that holds that wheelhouse in the Congress office or in your Senate office, you should reach out if you did not get selected and have a conversation. That's what I would absolutely recommend.
Yes. Our office is unable to like directly provide like grant writing services, but I wholeheartedly agree with what Sandra said, and that we are able and would want to provide feedback if groups are looking for that on prior projects.
Yeah, and although offices like our office doesn't do that, we could connect you or guide you to someone who can, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Tiffany, I would actually encourage you to reach out to the Small Business Administration because they are an agency that is able to provide free grant writing help and opportunities.
That's awesome.
Wonderful.
So let's knock this one out. This is probably my favorite slide because and everyone should know this is my first rodeo going through appropriations, but I learned so much and I want to make sure I share my learning moments. So I would say, if you have not already started to reach out to your congressional members, assembly members as well, We should talk about that. They also have a fund you can apply for, and those funds come from the state. So make sure you do that. So I would say if you have not already started your beautiful spreadsheet of your elected officials in your area in which you cover, I would highly recommend you start to do that so you can start to build those relationships. You definitely want to get onto their newsletter, because you want to get on that e-serve when they say applications have opened for your assembly as well, right? So you want to know when the applications are opening. The other thing I would say is, don't start preparing your project or your write-up for your project when applications open. The window is really, really small. So that's why we're having this conversation now. If you know you're going to try and apply for appropriations next year, you definitely want to start getting all of your paperwork together. That's why we threw those slides in about all the questions they're going to ask. They might ask even different ones, right? We can't guarantee they're going to ask our questions, but that's why we're starting the process earlier. The other thing I would highly recommend is you have to keep your account somewhere if you're applying for the very first time. And you have to share your account information with someone you trust, right? Just in case you're, on vacay, you want to make sure the process still moves quickly. I would say you want to, let me see. Yep. These literally happened. Somebody was on vacation, and the offices review the applications, and we couldn't find the individual because they were on vacation. The other thing too is you definitely want to leave a phone number that is accessible to an individual. True, I won't name the city, gave me the city phone number, and I could not track this person down. We were able to finally track them down and use somebody at the city, but it was really difficult. And you definitely want to make sure you're accessible. So think about when you apply, it's going to take 4 weeks. After that, who's going to be around to be able to answer that call if there's a question on the application? So you definitely want to do that. This happened. The congressional offices and the Senate offices will not line up their timelines on applications, right? For appropriations. They might have 2 different calendar dates, and the assembly will too. Make sure you're aware of all 3 different ones, because we're not all on the same one. And the other thing is, applications for the Senate will be on Eastern time, where applications due for the state will be on Pacific time. It matters, because once you miss that deadline, you miss that deadline. You're going to have to wait for appropriations a full year. So I think, I don't know, I can't read the very last one, but if I miss something, Camille, can you throw it in there?
Totally. Now, the last one, Sandra, is just simply to connect with other congressional offices, because we encourage you, one, for future opportunities, but also specifically for this congressionally directed spending, that the more people who are familiar with you, your organization, the work you're doing, we feel then that, the more just supporters and advocates you have for you back in Congress.
Yeah. Sounds good. Let me see, any questions in the chat we might be missing? I think we're good. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Alrighty, great. CRS, my favorite. Okay, so Congressional Research Services. I say it's my favorite because, look, I've only been here 1 year, and I've discovered not everybody knows about appropriations. That train has come and left already. But what you can still apply for is what we call CRS. Your Senate office has access to this year-round, and it's completely free. I like it because some of the organizations, nonprofits, cities, businesses might not have a full grant team, right? You don't have somebody who can go out and seek grants, but that's what this service is, and it's completely free and it's year-round. So what does it take to find out if you have grants out there that maybe your project matches? Literally a paragraph where you would say your organization and what you're seeking to fund. This is completely different than appropriations that we literally just talked about. Because one, it's year round. Two, it doesn't ask you 500 million questions, right? You don't have to have a breakdown line item. It's just basically saying, this is who I am, and this is the project I'm trying to fund. I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to give you extremes. The Chargers, they do, they have a nonprofit and they do this bike giveaway during the holidays. And we submitted that and they got like 21 grants, possible grants back that match. Who would have known? Who would have known? Okay, that's one. A nonprofit working on workforce development, right? Missed appropriations, came back, and they got a whole sheet of possible grants. Now, what takes place is you submit the paragraph to us. We then submit it to the Department of CRS. You got to wait like 7-9 days. They do a really good job. I imagine it's a whole bunch of folks in front of their computer just doing research all day. When the email comes back, we literally just forward it to you. It'll be your it'll be on your organization to go through each and every grant, their block grants, their private grants, their public grants, and see if you want to apply for any, if you meet the criteria for any, and then you'll just pick it up from there. But that is what CRS, I love it because one, it's free. You can do it year round. You can ask for anything, like anything under the sun. And to get it started, you don't have to have that breakdown, right? Like all of those 5 million questions. So let's see, any questions on CRS? So if I were you, this is what I would do. I would actually put this in my work plan, my yearly work plan. Once a quarter, I would ask my office, my Senate office, I would submit a CRS request once a quarter because you don't know what grants are coming through, right? So I would actually put it in my work plan, my yearly work plan, once a quarter, every 3 months, right? That's what I would do. I would recommend it. Let's see. I don't see any questions in the chat. And I literally mean you can ask for anything, like anything. And you never know, there's something out there. Let's see. I think there's a question. To whom at Senator Butler's office would we submit a CRS request? You could submit it to me. You could submit it to Camille. I submit about seven a week. I'd do more if people gave me more paragraphs. But why not? Why not? There are grants out there for people.
Then we have another question that was sent directly to me. Where do we submit the CRS? So I think the answer to that is just they go through you, right? So they would email you.
Mm-hmm. Or if you want, they can email you. You can send it to me. I can send it back to you. However you guys want to do it.
Absolutely. I encourage all of you, if you want to email me or Alicia to connect you to the senator's office, we can do that.
Yeah. And then just real quick, we wanted to get this moving because it does take a second for them to respond to CRS requests. And, I'm sure everyone here knows the senator is not running. So our time is very limited and we want to be able to do as much as possible for you now. So, you can start sending them today. So just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that.
And then we have another question. How are discretionary funds requests processed?
Can you say a little bit more about that, whoever asked that? Do you mean the state? Do you mean appropriations?
So both on the congressional and on the state side, there are discretionary pilot funds. And I'm trying to find out that process.
commit?
I would, yeah,
Okay.
I thank you. And thank you for your question. I would recommend that the best thing to do is just get in contact with the office that is most regionally close to you. So in this case, I know many of you guys are based around LA County. It would be Senator Butler's LA office. So Sandra, you can connect with Sandra on that, and then she would connect you with one of our field representatives in that area who we kind of divvy up the LA region. So each of them is responsible for a set amount of counties, and then they could work a little bit more closely with you to learn about the project that you're seeking for discretionary funds. And then we would typically share that with our legislative DC team and then for the senator for consideration.
Yeah. Let's see. Any other questions on CRS? Oh, perfect. And 56.
Right.
I think everyone is running off to go write their paragraphs.
Well, good. Well, thank you all. You are welcome to follow us on many different forms of media. And then Sandra